Hey, welcome back to the Métropole Grid. My name is Andre. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today we got a big video for you. We're going to be running through the entirety of the timing structure of Netrunner. In short, we're going to be talking about things like conditional abilities, paid ability windows, priority, and the structure of turns and phases and when we can do certain things. Hopefully, by the end of this video, we'll reach this sort of piece in our timing. It's obviously a bit of an intimidating topic, so we have a lot to go through. What we're running through today, mind you can find out all this sort of information if you check out the Null Signal Games website. They have up there their comprehensive rules hub. And so this document is what we're working off of today. This is the version 22.12. This was released at the beginning of December of 2022. And this document is fantastic. It is really well indexed. It has all the topics really well explained out with even examples. But this document as well is 133 pages. So it's a bit of an intimidating read, but we're ideally in this video going to go through all the things we think are the most important that you can be equipped to understand. Again, timing structures in Netrunner is a pretty important thing to get right. Now, there's a lot of ground to cover today, so there are timestamps in the YouTube time bar, so if there's a certain topic you care about, feel free to jump around. As well, unfortunately, my editorial process is only me, so if there are any mistakes we made in the video, if there are any updates to this document and things suddenly become inaccurate, do pay attention to the pinned comment, in which I will collate any corrections, any mistakes, any big changes. So do check that out to make sure we're still on track at this point in the video. Finally, if this is useful to you, if you enjoyed this sort of content, liking this video, leaving a comment, sharing this with a friend, subscribing to the channel are all fantastic ways they can help support the channel. So let's dive in. And the place we want to start today is by talking about certain things called conditional abilities. Conditional abilities are what they sound like. They're abilities that will fire in reaction to a certain condition being triggered. As an example, let's look here at Jinteki Personal Evolution. This is a conditional ability. It says whenever an agenda is scored or stolen, do 1 net damage. Throughout this video, we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about paid abilities. Those are certain things that you can choose to trigger during paid ability windows, but conditional abilities are a bit different. They are things that will fire automatically, generally, when there is something that they care about. A condition triggers, and so they will fire. So Personal Evolution says whenever you score or an agenda is stolen, you do 1 net damage. This is called a conditional ability. Now, I think most players understand how these work. You have a trigger, it fires when the thing happens, but the question comes up, what happens when you have multiple conditional abilities that have the same trigger? So imagine we're playing Personal Evolution that doesn't net damage when we score an agenda, but what about if the agenda we're scoring out is something like Hybrid Release? Hybrid Release is a 2-1 agenda that says when we score it, it's optional, we can install a face-down card from archives. So now we have 2 cards that have the same trigger, one of them mandatory, one of them optional. When we score at a Hybrid Release, what is the order that these cards fire? To complicate it a bit further, imagine on the table we have a Resed Vera, and Vera says when we score an agenda out, we can look at the runner's grip and trash one of those cards. So in this situation, we have 3 abilities that have the same conditional ability. They all want to fire out when an agenda has been scored. The question is, what is the order of operations here? So the thing to remember here is if you have multiple conditional abilities that are firing off the same condition, the player who controls the conditional abilities chooses the order they fire. So for us, if we score out an agenda in this situation, playing Personal Evolution, we score out a Hybrid Release with a Vera, we can actually choose the order that these triggers fire sequentially. Now, some of them are mandatory, some of them are optional, so we can always choose not to do any of the optional triggers, but it's up to us to do any of these triggers in our choice of order. So for us, it probably makes most sense that we fire maybe Vera first, so we can look at the hand, get a bit of information, trash the card that we most like to trash. Then from there, we can fire Personal Evolution to do some net damage, and then after we've gained the most information about what the runner's hand looks like, we can go ahead and fire Hybrid Release. Now, where this does get more complicated is what about if our opponent equally has same sort of conditional abilities that are firing off of the same reaction window? So let's look across the table, and you notice our opponent is playing the console Mero. And Mero says when the Corp scores an agenda, we have to sabotage 1. So that actually has the same timing structure. It's going to fire when the agenda is scored. It's also not optional, so we know this has to fire. Say also the runner is playing the ability, they're playing Dao Salanga, and Dao says, optionally, whenever an agenda is scored or stolen, you may swap 2 installed pieces of ice. So now we have 5 separate abilities, conditional abilities that are waiting to fire in the same reaction window. What is the order of operation? And what's important to understand here is that whenever there is an amount of these conditional abilities, we have to determine who has priority. And priority is something that's really, really easy to understand in Netrunner. Whoever is the active player has priority. The active player is defined as the person who is doing their turn. So as a corporation, if you're scoring out agendas, that is only something that can be done on the corporation's turn. That means the corporation will be the active player. And why that matters is that we understand the active player has priority. And when it comes to conditional abilities in this reaction window type thing, the active player has to do all of their abilities first. Now, they can do them in their choice of order. They also have to do their mandatory abilities here. They can choose to do their optional abilities. But in this situation, the Corp's abilities have to go first. So out of the 5 abilities we have, we know the corporation has to do their 3 abilities first. So that means we have to choose the order we want to do these. Say we have that same idea. We're going to do Vera first, then Personnel Evolution, and then we'll score the hybrid release. But now, once the corporation has done firing all their mandatory and optional conditional abilities in their choice of order, and again, they don't have to do the optional ones, but once they're done, they say that they pass priority to the inactive player. And now the inactive player gets to do all of their conditional abilities in their choice of order. So again, the active player has to go first, and then the inactive player goes, and each player decides the order of their triggers. So then the inactive player fires, maybe they'll do Marrow first. They have to do this one, mind you, it is mandatory. And then they choose, say, not to do Douse Long's ability. It is optional. Now, this is really important because if you look at these interactions, you might think as a corporation, you would love the runner to do Marrow first and sabotage a card, and then you'd love to be able to return that card to the table with hybrid release. But this is what's very important to understand when it comes to priority with conditional abilities is the active player is required to go first, then they pass, and then the inactive player does theirs. So there's no way to make this a favorable interaction where you sabotage first and then return the card. Very important to understand too here is once you pass priority, you've done your conditional abilities and you pass priority to the inactive player and the inactive player does their conditional abilities, you never return priority. We'll talk about this when we come to paid ability windows, but you have one shot to do your stuff here. You do them all at the front if you're the active player, then the inactive player goes, and it never returns to the active player. So do everything you want to do now because you're not getting another opportunity to do that. Now, these sort of conditional ability things, I think a lot of players learned this back in the day of the FFG 2012 core set if you played that, when it comes to the interaction between Femme Fatale and then other ice. Now, Femme Fatale, when you install it, you get to choose a piece of ice, and then it has a conditional ability. It says when you encounter the chosen ice, you can pay a credit for each subroutine to bypass that piece of ice. So the question comes up, what happens if I encounter a piece of ice and I want to do the Femme Fatale conditional ability, but that piece of ice also has a conditional ability on it with the same timing structure? Tollbooth says when the runner encounters this, they have to pay 3 credits or end the run. And now we should be equipped to answer this question. We have to look at whoever's the active player. 99% of the time, the active player during a run will be the runner because it's on the runner's turn, they're making a run, which means we have 2 abilities that both fire when the runner encounters a piece of ice, and the runner has to do theirs first if they want to do them. Femme, mind you, is not a mandatory ability, so you could always decide not to, but the Femme will always go first before the Tollbooth if it is the runner's turn. So that means we can pay 1 credit to bypass the Tollbooth. This is also a very interesting problem because once you bypass the toll booth, we're no longer encountering the toll booth. That means any pending conditional abilities will cease to exist because the window in which they were relevant doesn't exist anymore. So you actually get through the toll booth for only 1 credit and you never have to pay 3. So keep that in mind. Conditional abilities, 2 cards with the same trigger. The active player has to do their stuff first if they're going to do anything. Again, if it's optional, you can decide not to, and then the inactive player goes. Now, just to shout this out here, because this always comes up in conversation, there used to be an old card in the standard format called an offer you can't refuse. This card has rotated for a while now, but this allowed the runner to make a run on the corporation's turn, which actually upsets that dynamic, and now the runner will not be the inactive player while doing a run. It's the Corp's turn, so they can fire Toll Booth first. It's weird, and this is the only card, I think, in the history of Netrunner that allows the runner to run on the corporation's turn. Now, this sort of basic fundamental understanding of conditional abilities and that you're allowed to order your triggers in your choice of order comes up in a bunch of different times in Netrunner. When you score abilities, there's often a bunch of those, so understanding that you have to trigger them in a certain order, that's really nice. Another really common one is when turn begins triggers. That's a really sometimes busy conditional ability reaction window thing. So imagine as the corporation, you have a Bladderwort on the table and you have 3 credits. You also have a Res Refuge campaign. These both say when your turns begin to do something. Bladderwort gives you a credit and then a net damage if you're below a credit threshold, while Refuge campaign just gives you 2 credits. This is the exact same situation where you have multiple conditional abilities, the condition being when your turn begins, so you can fire them in the order of your choosing. So the best option for us largely would be do Bladderwort first. We hit 4 credits, we do a net damage, then we hit the Refuge campaign, we hit 2 more credits, we're on 6. So we can have our cake and eat it too. Now, I want to keep this approachable, and when it comes to the name of these things, reaction windows, conditional abilities, it's really technical, and I'll be honest, I only learned these names for this video. I didn't know what these things were called. Generally, players will just say, I have a bunch of triggers, I'm going to order my triggers. That's how people talk about it, and that's entirely fine. In fact, the words reaction window and conditional ability show up on no Netrunner cards to date. That might change in the future, but just understanding you don't actually need to know the technical names for these. You just have to understand how it works. Active player does their stuff first, then inactive player when it comes to these sort of conditional abilities. Another little thing to insert here, because this will come up with conditional abilities, is what's largely referred to as the checkpoint rule. This often comes up mostly during when your turn begins triggers, and to give you an example, let's look at Super Heavy Logistics. Op is a really fun identity, and it says once per turn when you trash an installed card, you can search your deck for a card that costs one less than the card that was trashed, and you can install and res it for free. So what the checkpoint rule states is that if you have a conditional ability that cares about a certain thing, like when your turn begins, do X, that card has to have been on the table at the exact point in time, at the exact checkpoint where when your turn began. The card itself needs to see the thing that it cares about. So imagine we're playing Op. This is where this comes up most often in standard right now and in startup. We're playing Op and we have resed a Reaper function and we care about the when your turn begins conditional ability. So Reaper function's resed, we're going to start doing our when your turn begins abilities. And of course we can order all our when our turns begins abilities in our choice of order. So we fire this, we do 2 net damage and trashes itself. And then we can use the Op ability to go search for a card. We search for a card called Pad Campaign, we install it and we res it for free. Now you might think we can continue to order our conditional when your turn begins abilities in our choice of order, and that is correct. But specifically, because this copy of Pad Campaign was not resed at the exact point in time of when our turn begins, the exact checkpoint of when your turn begins began, you will never be able to fire its when your turn begins trigger. Now, this is a really tricky thing, but that's the basic idea. If a card wasn't physically there to experience the checkpoint it cares about, if it comes in the middle of you sequencing all your stuff, it's still never going to fire because this card was not there to experience the when your turn begins trigger. Yeah, it seems like it's a bit counterintuitive with order your triggers, but that is the one caveat. The card has to have been there to see the trigger itself. And that should close out the whole topic about conditional abilities. We'll be talking about other examples, but just remember, when there's multiple things, conditional abilities, so not things that you have to do, things that say on them, when this happens, do this, you can order them in your choice of order. Active player has to go first. Once you're done, you're not doing anything anymore. You pass priority. Inactive player gets their ability to do all their conditional abilities too. Once they've passed, that's it. No more conditional abilities. Awesome. With that under the way, we can start talking about paid abilities, paid ability windows, and all that nice, fun timing stuff. So in Netrunner, there's a very big term called paid abilities. And the explanation of what paid abilities are, the definition is it's kind of funny how broad it is. In short, a paid ability is something in Netrunner that takes the form of cost, colon, so like the punctuation colon, and then some effect. So that's a massively broad definition. In fact, anything with a colon in it is largely a paid ability, and that covers the majority of cards in Netrunner. So something like a 15 minutes that has a click ability on it, click colons, cost colon effect, that is a paid ability. Something like an Abigail, a decoder that you can click, trash, bypass the code gate, that is a paid ability. There's a lot of things that are paid abilities, anything cost colon effect. Now, the majority of times though, when people are talking about paid abilities in Netrunner and paid ability windows, they're actually talking about a smaller subsection of paid abilities. Now, this is kind of just a semantic thing that's worth understanding, but any card that has amount of clicks, colon, some effect, these are technically paid abilities. So the basic action cards that you've been playing with Runner and Corp side, those are actually called paid abilities, cost, colon, effect. However, specifically that subsection of paid abilities are referred to as action paid abilities. Now, I'm assuming with some confidence you understand how actions work in Netrunner. They're pretty straightforward. You get actions to do on your turn when you do them in your action phase. We'll go over that a bit, but it's worth knowing that when we talk about paid ability windows and when you can do, interesting paid ability stuff, we're more talking about cards like this that don't have a click. That's because Netrunner is really structured on when you can spend a click, but when you can draw 2 cards with Stone Chip Chart Room, there's a huge amount of times that you can do that. So just keep that in mind that technically cards with a click ability are paid abilities. However, they're kind of outside the scope of what we're talking about. We're talking about the weird stuff that don't require a click to use because you can only spend a click on your turn when you can spend a click. these you can use in much larger ways. So understanding that, besides the action paid abilities, the sort of paid abilities we care about today, there's actually a whole different bunch of kinds of paid abilities. The first one are called basic paid abilities. These are cards that just have some sort of cost, trash this thing, some sort of effect, draw 2 cards. This is a paid ability. You'll see this on a bunch of cards, Corp cards and runners alike. If we look at Spin Doctor, remove this asset from the game is the cost, effect, shuffle 2 cards, up to 2 cards from archives into R&D. This is a paid ability, and this is called a basic paid ability. Icebreakers too have some basic paid abilities on them, and this is really strange. This 2 credits for +1 strength, that is a paid ability. This is actually really interesting because you can technically fire this at any paid ability window during a turn, during your opponent's turn. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It largely doesn't do anything unless you're encountering ice, but you have to know that this is something that happens during paid ability timing and is technically a button you can use and many times on someone's turn to throw your credits into the void. That is a paid ability. Similarly, this interface, 1 credit to break 2 barrier subroutines, that is also a paid ability, and this is one of the few paid abilities that have limited times in which you can use them. You can only use interface paid abilities when you're encountering a piece of ice and you have matched the strength or exceeded the strength of the ice you are encountering. So technically a paid ability, breaking ice subroutines, and I imagine if you're playing Netrunner, you understand how to break ice subroutines, but important to know that that actually functions within the timing structure of when you're allowed to use paid abilities. Further, rezzing cards is a paid ability. We know that rezzing a regolith mining license doesn't take a click, so the question is when can you not, and when can you do that is when you have a paid ability. Now, resin cards is one of the paid abilities that doesn't strictly take the form of cost : effect. If you want to imagine that this says 2 credits : get a mining license, you can look at it like that. But understanding that resin cards is something you can only do at paid ability window speed and during a paid ability window is incredibly important. Furthermore, upgrades, no different, something you can only res during paid abilities. Understanding when that is during a run to res this at the last possible moment is a pretty important skill to have. Finally, rezzing ice is also a paid ability, but this one is a bit more restricted. You can only do this during an approach of that piece of ice. So you can't res ice for free whenever you want, only during approach. We'll be talking about those steps, but just again, remembering and understanding that rezzing ice happens at paid ability speed. So who has priority, what can they do while they res ice? Knowing all of that is going to be important. Finally, the last paid ability is scoring agendas. This one's sometimes a bit unintuitive, but the act of showing that an agenda has enough advancements on it and scoring it out is something that happens at paid ability speed. So understanding who has priority during those windows and what they can do before or after it is also quite important, but scoring agendas is a paid ability. All right, so we understand the basic paid abilities. Now we want to understand the structure of how they work. This is a big thing with Netrunner. Say we have 2 players who want to do something at the same time. Who can go first is a big question we can answer. So say we have a card like House of Knives, and House of Knives has a very potent paid ability on it. It says you can use an agenda counter to do 1 net damage during a run. So say the runner is in the middle of a run, and mind you, there are a lot of paid ability windows during runs, but say the runner has no cards in hand. But they also have an installed Stoneship chart room, which also at paid ability speed allows them to draw 2 cards. So now we have 2 players who want to fire a paid ability, one of them costing the game, one of them is saving the game. Who gets to go first? And that's the sort of thing we'll be exploring with the timing structure. It's important to understand that Netrunner is a very different game than a bunch of other card games. Card games like Magic the Gathering, they have a stack. So you can respond to stuff pretty freely. Somebody does something, you say, oh, before you do that, I do this. And you get the sort of like last in, first out structure. That alone allows for a lot more things like counter spells and nullification. You can respond to something before it fires. Netrunner isn't like that. It has actually a very strict structured thing, but there's not going to be a lot of interrupts and surprises. It's more so understanding who has priority and they get to do whatever they want to do first without any sort of interruption. That's very important. So paid abilities in this game, rezzing stuff, basic paid abilities, scoring agendas, that stuff can only happen during what's called a paid ability window. We'll be talking about where the paid ability windows actually are within a turn and within a run, but understand that these are things that you can only do when paid ability windows exist. Luckily for us, there's lots of them, but the idea is that if you want to go ahead and res your Spin Doctor, you want to go ahead and use its ability, you want to res your regolith mining license, these are things that you can only do during a paid ability. So understanding where those are is very important. Now, we mentioned this before. What about if we have 2 players that during the same paid ability window, they both want to do something? The corporation wants to res a regolith mining license, and then for some reason, the runner wants to go ahead and pop a no free lunch to gain 3 credits. Who gets to go first? So for this, we have to understand how priority works with paid ability windows. And luckily for us, it's incredibly simple. It's in fact the exact same rules with conditional abilities. whoever is the active player gets priority in every single paid ability window. So that means if it's the corporation's turn, they are the active player and they have priority. So when a paid ability window opens, the corporation is allowed to do as many paid abilities as they want in a row before handing priority back to the runner. So for instance, a paid ability window opens up on the corporation's turn. The corporation can res a spin doctor. Then, without allowing the runner to do anything, they can shuffle 2 cards from archives back into R&D because they still have the paid ability window priority. Then again, before allowing the runner to do everything, the corporation still is holding on to priority. They can go ahead and res their regolith mining license. At this point, say the corporation has done enough of their paid abilities, and now they can say, I'll hand priority over to the runner. And now the runner is allowed to do as many paid abilities in a row as they want without any interruption because they now have priority. So here the runner can go ahead and gain 3 credits from no free lunch, and then holding priority, they'll say, okay, I'm now going to go and get a program and install it with self-modifying code. Mind you, this is a paid ability window. And then they can do as many paid abilities as they want in a row. Now, where this is different than the conditional ability thing is that this actually passes back and forth between the players. So say the runner is done doing the stuff they want to do, then they say, I'm done, and then priority returns back to the other player. So here, the corp will gain priority again, and if they have, say, another spin doctor in another remote server, they can go ahead and res that. Once the corporation, again, can do as many paid abilities as they want, it passes back to the runner can do paid abilities, it passes back to the corporation, and it passes back and forth forever until 2 players consecutively pass. Now, I want to quickly correct this because 2 players consecutively pass is technically accurate, but probably the better way to understand it is the paid ability window will close as soon as one player receives paid ability window priority and immediately passes. That means technically one player passed, another player received priority and they passed. So you can think of that as 2 players consecutively passing. But I just want to make sure that you don't think it means that 2 players consecutively pass and the first player didn't do any paid abilities. It just means that someone who received priority immediately passes, and then there's technically 2 passes in a row. That is admittedly a bit more tricky to convey. So when I say consecutive pass, that's more accurately what I mean. Now, when that happens and a player passes priority to another player and that player immediately passes, the paid ability window closes, which means neither player is going to have the ability to do any more paid abilities until the next paid ability window opens, which will largely be a later point in the turn. So say the corporation player, who is the active player, reses a spin doctor, they pass to the runner, and the runner immediately passes, that window closes. And so if the corporation wanted to res a regolith mining license before their next click, they can't, unless there's another paid ability window there. This is wild, and it doesn't actually show up in most Netrunner games. Most players don't get trapped where they don't have access to paid abilities. There's just enough of them. But just understand that if you pass to your opponent and your opponent immediately passes, you're not doing any more paid abilities during this window. So, importantly, the active player has priority. They can do as many things in a row as they want before passing to the inactive player. An active player now has priority. They can do as many things uninterrupted until they pass back, and that passing will continue to happen until a player who receives priority immediately passes. At that point, the window closes. We're done doing paid abilities. Now, this is different than the conditional ability thing, because with the conditional ability, each player only has 1 chance to do their things. But for this, it could pass back and forth, technically infinitely, you could argue. Cool. So understanding that, let's look at a structure of turn to see where the paid abilities exist, so we can see functionally how this matters. So in section 11, at the bottom of the comprehensive rules, there's this quick write-up talking about the structure of a turn. We'll get back to this in more detail. I just want to show you the action phase. The action phase on a corp's turn, here, that's what we're looking at. That's when the corp gets to take their clicks. They take their actions. And it's important to see that before and after every single click they take, there is a paid ability window. Here on the charts, you'll see that these different letters, and that actually determines what you're capable of doing at each paid ability window. P stands for basic paid ability window. So the things like stone chip chart room, anything that's just like cost : effect. Those you can do at basically every paid ability window in the entirety of the game. Now, there are certain considerations and other paid ability windows that you can or can't do things. This sounds a bit more intimidating than it looks. For instance, S means that's a scoring paid ability window. So that's the only paid ability windows where you can score agendas. Largely, those only exist on the corporation's turn. So you don't have to worry about those on the runner's turn. There is one paid ability at the end of the turn. You can't score agendas, but largely these things are a bit more straightforward than they look. You can res, that's what they are means, so you can res non-ice cards at almost every single paid ability window -1. So there are certain exceptions at certain paid ability windows where you're not allowed to do certain things. We'll be going over most of them, but it is generally pretty flat. The exceptions are kind of notable, and we will be covering those. So now as you see the action phase, there is a paid ability window before and after the corporation takes every single one of their clicks. What that means functionally is you have a lot of safety in paid ability windows as the runner. Say for click 1, the corporation plays a public trail. Now, the runner decides not to or is unable to pay 8 credits, so they have a tag. If the corporation now next click wants to play a retribution, you have to understand the corporation has to allow a paid ability window to exist. So how this works fundamentally in Netrunner is after the public trail resolves, there's a paid ability window. So the corporation has to say, paid ability window opens, I have nothing I'd like to do, I'll pass priority to you. And now as the runner, if you have a no free lunch on the table, you can just use that in the paid ability window and remove the tag. So that means 99% of the time, the corporation is unable to play 2 operations in a row without giving you the ability to do something. So that paid ability window between clicks is incredibly important for your safety. Now, between 2 clicks is easy to understand, but just to make it even more broad and safe, this is Drago Ivanov. And Drago Ivanov can be rezzed, and you can use Drago's ability at paid ability speed. So imagine there was a Drago on the table that was advanced last turn. So the first paid ability window opens on a turn before the corporation even spends their first click, and they have priority. So they say, I will res Drago in this paid ability window, then holding priority, I will spend 2 hosted advancement counters to give the runner a tag. At this point, they would love to play a retribution, but of course, we're still within the paid ability window. So the corporation has to say, I'm done doing my paid abilities, I'll pass priority to the runner. And of course, that is where you can play your no free lunch, or sorry, you can fire your no free lunch before the corporation can even spend the click to take your retribution. Now, after you fire the no free lunch, remember, you have to pass priority back to the corporation. So if they have additional counters on the Drago Ivanov, they can still move them over and tag you. And unless we have more no free lunches, it will be a problem. But just remember there's huge safety before every single click. That means inherently any card that takes a click to do something, you can always react to it. So the corporation reses their Ronin in the paid ability window before they can spend the click to trash this thing, you can always fire your Stone Ship chart room. Now this might begin to sound incredibly tedious. The Corp has to say before every single click, paid ability window opens, I have no paid ability, I pass priority. The runner says, I receive priority, I have nothing to do, window closes, I will start my first click. That functionally doesn't have to happen. And you'll see if you're watching Netrunner games, that almost never happens. In fact, people are only asking about whether you want to do something in those paid ability windows if there's something on the table that matters. The more you play Netrunner, the more you realize there's only frighteningly few cards in the game that are relevant at every paid ability window. It's true that the runner could technically fire no free lunch between every single click the corporation has. It just functionally largely doesn't matter, so it's not even asked. You could always ask, hey, before you do your action, let me do this, and they'll let you do it, of course, they have to, but it's not as tedious and as grinding as you think it is. There's a lot of shortcutting here because not every paid ability window matters. In fact, most of them are absolutely ignored. Now you will start to learn there's certain cards that make you slow down between clicks. If the falsely discord, this is a paid ability window that is relevant at most paid ability windows between clicks the runner spends. That's really important. Cards like Street Peddler, this is an old standard card back in the day. This allowed you to install cards at instant speed. That actually could be a huge roadblock. You might want to ask the runner if they want to do something before you start your next click. And then right now in standard for at least another month maybe, there's still Spark Agency. This one says the first time a turn you res an advertisement, the runner loses a credit. So if the runner just wants to go on their turn and do like click, click, install a thing, the corporation can interrupt you at any of those paid ability windows before you do something to go ahead and res a pad campaign. So you have 1 fewer credit than you think. These sort of paid abilities that are relevant at every single paid ability window on a turn, there's very few cards like this luckily in Netrunner. So largely when the game slows down to ask if each paid ability window between each click is relevant, you're probably going to see it coming. It's kind of rare. Okay. Now, the rite of passage, the explanation of Clot. This is the card that most often comes up in questions and is one of the biggest cards that you can help yourself to understand what priority looks like on a turn. So as we talked about on a Corp turn, there's a paid ability window before and after every single action the corporation takes. I would argue here that this action phase chart isn't as intuitive as it looks. It currently looks like there's only a paid ability window before every single action, but the way that this thing recursively loops back because B1 and B2 are not, they're technically otherwise clauses, there is also a paid ability window after the third click the corporation takes. And that's actually a really important paid ability window. It's incredibly important because if you have an agenda on the table and you spend your turn doing advance, 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 you need a paid-ability window to score the agenda. And so you always have a paid-ability window after your final click. Just watch out. I think it's easy to misread this action phase chart. It is technically accurate, but I'd argue it's probably not the most intuitive way to read it. Now, Clot is an incredibly notable card. This is one of the very few cards in the history of Netrunner that stops corporations from fast advancing. That's a term used for scoring out agendas on the same turn they were installed. So you don't have to hide them behind ice. You just get them out from hand and you go. Now, Clot is a card that is most often played in decks that can produce this card at instant speed during paid ability windows. Mind you, Clot simply says you cannot fast advance agendas if this card is on the table. So Clot is most often played alongside cards like Self-Modifying Code that says at paid ability speed, you can produce this onto the table. So between the clicks that the corporation is going to spend to try and advance out their agendas, you can produce the Clot. Similarly, Simulchip, the same sort of idea. Now, to understand how priority works with this card, let's talk about a fast advance example. Say the corporation first click plays Biotic Labor. They now have 4 more clicks on their turn, so they can install a 3-2 agenda and they can do advance, advance, advance. Now, that is their last click, but they have a paid ability window after their final click, and because they're the active player, they have priority going into that paid ability. So paid ability window opens and they say, I would like to take a paid ability. I'm going to score this agenda. And again, scoring an agenda is a paid ability thing that has to be scheduled during paid ability windows. So the luminal is scored. Now, if the runner thought that if the corporation was going to do biotic, advance, 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 and once that third advancement was on the card, they were going to go use their self-modifying code to produce a Clot at instant speed and say, ha, you can't score out the agenda anymore, sucker. Unfortunately, you're just a bit too late. Because of course, when the corporation spends their final click of that turn to put advancement, the final advancement on the 3-2 agenda, the next paid ability window that opens, the corporation, being the active player, has priority. So they just say, okay, I'll score. No more paid ability windows passed to you. And that's the first window there where you think, oh, I was going to SMC a Clot. But it's too late. And it is simply too late because you do not have priority on the corp's turn as the runner. So that means if you want to be able to Clot out an agenda, you always have to do it before the final action that will put the final advancement on the agenda. Generally, when corporations are playing around or expecting or baiting out a Clot, they'll say, install a card. Is there anything you want to do to see if you want to pull out the SMC Clot right there? If you say no, they'll advance it once and say, okay, new paid ability window, anything you want to do there. Notice when they ask anything you want to do there, that is them implicitly saying that they are passing priority to you. Otherwise, they could have done something first. And here, if you say no, they'll advance it a second time, say anything you want to do now. And this is the last moment if you're expecting it to be a 3-2 agenda that you can pull out a Clot. They implicitly pass priority to you. You crack your SMC, you install a Clot, you pass priority back to them. They could do something here in a paid ability window if they want to, and now they have their final click ahead of them. So if they go ahead and put the third advancement on the luminal, they can't score it out because Clot is on the table. It's a really important rite of passage in Netrunner, understanding that if you want to produce a Clot, because you do not have priority, the last paid ability window that you can use that will interrupt the score is before the final advancement. This sometimes gets a bit tricky when you start working with cards that for a single click can put multiple advancements on a card. If you're worried about an Audacity card, you actually probably should just Clot a bit sooner, because if they spend a click to put 2 advancements on it, they have priority after that, they can score out a 3-2 if this comes out a bit quicker than you might have been expecting. All right, another example to deeper our knowledge about Clot and paid ability windows. This is Sansan City Grid. This used to be a very popular card back in the day. This card says when it's rezzed, agendas in its server can be advanced out 1 easier. So imagine we have a Sansan City Grid in a remote server. It's already there. And on our turn, we begin. First click, we install a 3-2 agenda. Then second and third click, we do advance, advance. After the third click, there's a paid ability window. We're the active players, the corporation, so we have priority. So while holding priority, we can res the Sansan City Grid. Mind you, resing cards is a paid ability thing, and then we can continue to hold priority and score at the agenda. So we can do all of that before handing priority back, and the runner might at that point be like, ah, crap, I missed my window to pull out the Clot. So that means if the runner understands there's a Sansan on the table, they need to pull out the Clot after the first advancement, because that is the last paid ability window in which they can get before you score that out and have priority. Now, there's another very important card that shows up with fast advance decks, and that is Mavirus. This is a Corp card. And mind you, it's an upgrade, so we can res this at any paid ability window where we can res cards. That's most of them. And it has another paid ability window that allows us to purge virus counters. Very importantly, Clot gets trashed when virus counters are purged. So as long as we have a Mavirus hanging out on the table, we can again use this to our advantage when it comes to paid ability windows. So say, again, we have a Sansan on the table. First click, we install our 3-2 agenda on top of it. Second click, we advance it. Here, the runner understands, oh, wait, I know what's going to happen here. So they use their self-modifying code when they have priority during the paid ability window between our second and third click. They produce the clot. Then they say we pass priority back to us. We have one final action on our turn. And for our third click, we advance the tomorrow's headline. A paid ability window opens because we've spent an action and we have priority. So all within that priority, we can go ahead and res them a virus. We can purge virus counters. We can res the San City grid, and we can score out the agenda. So we actually do 4 different paid abilities in a row within that same window. And once we're done all of the paid abilities, then we pass priority back to the runner. So even if they had the ability to simul-chip back their clot, which we trashed by resing and purging them a virus, they just simply don't have the ability to do that because, again, we do as many paid abilities in a row with priority as we're the active player before handing back priority to the runner. So Mavirus, a very important card. It's one of the few ways you can beat Clot at instant speed. All right. Hopefully understanding all of that, we can pitch a really ridiculous example and you can understand how the corporation can string together 6 or 7 paid ability windows without handing over priority. That is inherently the beauty of paid ability windows and being the active player. So you can imagine the corporation spending their first click to install a freedom of information on top of an unres San City grid. A paid ability window opens in which the corporation has priority. So here they res the San City grid. Then we res a spin doctor that was on the table at paid ability speed. Again, we're not handing over priority till we're done. We draw 2 cards clicklessly. Then we res a moon pool that's hanging out on the table and we use its paid ability to trash 2 cards from HQ, 2 agendas we just drew. We revealed them from archives, shuffled them into our deck, and put 2 advancement counters on the freedom of information. And then, still not letting go of priority, we score it out. That is all the sort of wild stuff you can do with paid ability priority because, again, uninterrupted, you can do as much as you want. If the runner is sitting on the other side of the table with a no free lunch to stop the tags or a clot to stop the fast advance, they're entirely out of luck because you're doing all the stuff you want and then you can just say pass priority after you've scored. Phenomenal. And that is the basic idea of paid ability windows. When a window opens, based off of what the window is, we'll talk about the turn structure. The active player goes first and they can do the type of paid abilities that are allowed by that paid ability window. Usually it's most of them. They can do as many as they want, then they pass to their opponent, the inactive player. The inactive player then can do as many paid ability windows as they want without interruption, and then they pass it back. It continues to bounce back and forth until a player who receives priority immediately passes, which means 2 players have consecutively passed, and then the window closes. That's the short of it. It is a very interesting thing to have control of. There's certain decks that love paid ability window speed. There's certain decks that don't even care about it and have no cards that interact with it, at least between clicks on the corpse or runner's turns. You're definitely going to be using them during runs. Speaking about the structure of turn, I think now we're prepared to talk about this to understand where the paid abilities are. We've largely gone through a big part of this. We've covered the entirety of the action phase. This is, mind you, is the corpse turn. The runner's turn is very, very slightly different, but during the action phase, that is the part of the turn where you do your things. That's where you spend your 3 clicks. And again, before and after every single click that the corporation takes, there will be a paid ability window for each player to take some amount of paid abilities they want. Of course, the corp will always go first. So I would say that we actually understand how the action phase works. A bunch of paid ability windows there. Let's talk about the other phases. The next thing up after the action phase is the discard phase. And really quickly, I just want to say that Netrunner does have structured phases like most card games do. But I'd argue that this is one of the games that most players can get away with not understanding the names of the phases. Knowing where the paid ability windows are is really important, but it's not like a game like, I don't know, Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! Where you have to be very clear and say, I'm moving to main phase 2, I'm moving to battle phase. You can kind of just do the thing that you're doing and it's really easily understood what it is you're doing. So if you don't know the names of these phases, not the biggest deal. Just understanding when you can do paid abilities, that's probably the most important thing. And of course, when things happen. So action phase ends and we go into the discard phase. The first part of the discard phase is the corp discards down to hand size. This is actually really important because there is no paid ability window here on this phase. The last paid ability window before your discard phase is the last paid ability that the corporation takes after their last action during their action phase. So you have any card that you want to have rezzed because it interacts with your hand size, say this old rotated cybernetics court, the last time that you can res this is during your action phase. Again, as soon as you hit the discard phase, you're a bit too late. There should be no problems rezzing this. Just remember you have to do this on your action phase. Now there's a paid ability window right after this, after you discard down to hand size. It is a really weird paid ability window here, specifically for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's the only paid ability on the corpse turn where you cannot score agendas. Mind you, you can score agendas during your action phase, also during your draw phase, we'll get to that, but you can't score agendas here. Why is that? Some reasons, mind you. Cards like Hard-Hitting News, these are terminal operations. And when you play them, it just ends your action phase after the card is resolved. And Hard-Hitting News gives the opponent 4 tags, which means that if you give the opponent 4 tags and there's a freedom of information on the table, this is an agenda that requires no advancements to score out. That means because after you play the Hard-Hitting News, you go directly to your discard phase, you actually can't score out the freedom of information for free. So I wouldn't say that's the reason why that is like that, but it's a reason why it's important to understand that the next paid ability window after you play a terminal isn't a one that you can score out. Now, this paid ability window is just very strange. It's not very well used. Technically, it's the last paid ability window before the runner's turn starts in which the corporation has priority. That can matter in some really obscure states. It's also the last paid ability window before your turn ends or the discard phase ends. So if you want to fire Restoring Humanity, which cares about having face down cards in archives, you could fire Moonpool here if you really wanted to. That's weird. That doesn't often happen, but just that is the last paid ability window on your turn in which you will have priority. You cannot score out. Also, a small nuance here. There are some cards that care about when your discard phase ends, do something, and there's some cards that care about when your turn ends, do something. Those are technically slightly different timings. I don't think it really matters. Your turn ending is actually not even the last thing on your turn. Your discard phase ends slightly after that. So I don't think it functionally matters. Just some of those timings are slightly off. You'll be fine. Now, let's loop back up to the top, and this one's really important. This is when the Corp's turn begins. This is the draw phase, and there's some really interesting paid ability windows here, some very important ones. So on the draw phase, firstly at the top, you gain your allotted clicks, so you're largely going to be gaining 3 clicks there unless something cool happened on your turn, and then you hit the super important paid ability window, and this is a huge paid ability window. You can do whatever you want largely. You can res non-ice cards, basic paid ability windows, you can score agendas. This one's awesome, and a lot of players don't realize there's a paid ability window here, and this is such an important paid ability window. Firstly, this is your last paid ability window you have before you're going to draw 1 card. That's your mandatory draw. So if you want to fire the paid ability on Spin Doctor to shuffle cards back into your deck so you have a chance to draw them on your mandatory turn, this is when you have to do that. That's your last time to do it, at least. But more importantly, you realize here the Corp's turn begins happens later on in the step. You might think the Corp's turn begins is the first thing that happens on the Corp's turn, but it's not. You have a paid ability first. Shout out to all those folks who watched the original 2012 FFG Learn to Play Netrunner video who learned about the pad campaign window. So here, you can res cards and they will be resed before your turn begins. So say you have a card like Pad Campaign that says when your turn begins to gain a credit, this is the last time you have to res this card and it will still do the thing at the start of turn. This is so valuable because a lot of times in Netrunner, you're putting cards in remote servers that do cool things at the start of turn, but you obviously want to res these only right before they actually are going to have a chance to do something. So that means if you have a refuge campaign in a remote server, don't res it on the runner's turn. Obviously, don't res it before they spend their clicks because they'll know what it is so they can decide whether they want to run or trash it. So this is the last point in time where you can res it and guarantee you're going to get value from it because the next thing that's going to happen is the start of turn begins. So this is such a great window. A lot of players forget about this and think that, oh, to res things before my turn begins, I have to do them on the runner's turn. And there are windows on the runner's turn that you can very safely res things that after they've spent all their clicks. So you can get away with that. But there is a very important window here that is probably the best case scenario for most decks to res this start of turn stuff that they have. Now, another thing to note is the next thing that will happen here is the Corp's recurring credits fill. We're not going to really talk about this much because there's only 1 card in all of Standard that has recurring credits on the Corp side, and it's a bit of a mess. But in theory, if you had cards with recurring credits and you could use those recurring credits to do something cool, res a card at paid ability speed, this is the time that you should do it because after this paid ability window ends, the recurring credits refill. So if you have some value on the table, you might as well get use of it before the value is refilled. This is also really neat. This is a window in which you can score agendas, which is super wild. And I'll be honest, I've never seen anyone do this. But check this out. Imagine you're playing Personal Evolution. When you score an agenda, you get to do a damage. Classic conditional ability. And on the table, last turn you did install advance, and you have a hybrid release waiting on the table. You decided not to score this on your last turn. Now, of course, you can't score agendas on the runner's turn. We'll look at the paid abilities, but this is the first paid ability window you can score when your turn starts. So you do. You score this out and you order your conditional abilities. So we go ahead and do the damage with Jinteki Personal Evolution, and then we choose to fire the hybrid release. Now with the hybrid release, we can install a card from our archives and we install a face down Reaper function. Now you notice we still have priority. We're still within the paid ability window, so we can go ahead and res the Reaper function because again, you can res stuff during this window, which means we now have a res Reaper function. And when our turn begins in just a moment, it will fire. which means out of nowhere, a double advanced card on the table with Personal Evolution could mean 3 net damage, which is a really nice trick that a lot of people won't see coming because, again, most players have never seen anyone score an agenda during this window. It's really, really niche, and there's not a lot of reasons why you should do it, but you can, and it's kind of fun. Now, again, after that ability window, again, the runner can react to that paid ability window too, and that's really important. Mind you, if you go ahead and res a Reaper function, they can still respond during this paid ability window. Before your turn begins, you have to pass priority to them, and they can draw 2 cards with the Stone Chip chart room. So watch out, this paid ability window is open for both players, but this is the last one that exists before your turn begins. Then we talked about the recurring credits, but now our turn begins. And here, that's the conditional ability thing we talked about earlier in the turn. If you have a bunch of things that all say when your turn begins, you can choose the order of them. So if you want to fire your Bladderwort first while you have less credits and then fire the Rashida after, that's probably what you want to be doing. So remember, when you have multiple abilities, the active player, it'll be the corporation there, does all their abilities first in their choice of order, then they pass priority to the runner. That means if the runner does also have when the corp start turn ability, they have a conditional ability like Drug Dealer, this thing, the card you draw off of this, you can never hit this with the Bladderwort. Because again, active player has to go first, the corporation goes first, then the runner goes. Cool. And one last shout out, watch out for the checkpoint rule. If you ever have a card that enters play during when your turn begins, it has not seen the when your turn begins, so its when your turn begins won't fire. We talked about this earlier during conditional abilities. It's an important thing. And that is largely the entirety of the Corp's turn. Draw phase is really important to remember. There's a paid ability window there at the top that exists before your turn begins. Of course, we didn't mention that you draw your mandatory card after your turn begins. That's really important. So if you want to decide what to res, how much money to sink into assets, you can't see the top of your deck first. So again, mandatory draw is the last thing that you do during that phase. After that, we go to actions, and there's the paid ability window before and after every single action. So you have to pass that priority to the runner if you're not using it. Again, not a lot of minutia there happens. A lot of people will just kind of go through that quickly unless it really matters. And then once we get to the discard phase, there's one final paid ability window after you've discarded down. So if you want to do something before discard, just do it after your last action. And that paid ability window, you just can't score agendas. It's not a really good paid ability window. That's the Corp's turn. Now, the runner's turn is only slightly different. It's an asymmetrical game, so why not have a slightly asymmetrical turn structure? You'll notice that this is actually functionally identical to the corporation, except the runner only has 2 phases. They have the action phase and the discard phase, but I think there's only one line of difference here. The runner does not have a draw phase because the runner doesn't have a mandatory draw. So they just married together the draw phase and the action phase. You'll notice these first 4 lines or 5 lines are the same as the corporation's draw phase. There's just no mandatory draw there. I honestly don't know how I feel about that. Like, they could just have an upkeep phase, I guess, but there's only 2 phases for the runner, but functionally it's exactly same. No surprises here. You just have to understand 2 things. You can't score agendas because you just can't score agendas on the runner's turn. And of course, because the runner is the active player, they will have priority during every single paid ability window. That mostly matters during runs, and we'll talk about runs right after this because runs are things that happen on the runner's turns, again, 99% of the time, but otherwise, this works exactly the way that the Corp's turn works. So let's run through it. The runner's action phase begins, so they gain allotted clicks, and here they have that paid ability window at the beginning. This is that pad campaign paid ability that corporations should be excited about. Understand here that this is the last paid ability window the runner has before their start of turn. So if you have any paid ability window speed to, say, install something, maybe you fire a Gachapon and that gets you a fermenter that has a when your turn begins trigger. This is the last paid ability window for you to go search for things to get them installed so they can see your when your turn begins. Again, checkpoint rule. This is a nice one to get some use out of. After that, the runner's recurring credits fill. This is actually much more important for the runner than it is for the corporation because there are many more runner cards that use recurring credits. So imagine you have a card like Multi-Threader. It gives you 2 recurring credits to use for programs. So in this paid ability window before the recurring credits refill, if you have some Multi-Threader credits left over, why not use them? Because you're going to get those credits back in a moment. If you don't use them, you just kind of wasted some value. So imagine you have a Hyperbaric, which at instant paid ability speed, you can put a power counter on this for 2 credits to increase its strength permanently. That's a really nice use of your Multi-Threader credits. So again, if you get this far, just milk some more value out of your recurring credits because this is where they get refilled. Next up, the runner's turn begins. This is no different than the corporation. We're going to have a huge conditional ability pile up here, especially if you're playing Modern Anarch, where you're going to have a bunch of stuff that say start a turn, do something. And you are the active player, so all your start a turn triggers go first in your choice of order, and then the corporation's start of the runner's turn triggers happen. There's not a lot of those. But just remember that you can order your start a turn triggers in the order that makes sense for you. So say that you have 4 credits on a daily cast, you can gain 2 credits off the daily cast, and then pawn it to the Aesop's pawn shop. Or if there was only 2 credits on the daily cast, you can pawn it to the Aesop's pawn shop before the daily cast goes itself. So exact same rule, you have a bunch of conditional abilities, you choose the order, you're the active player, you have to do your stuff first. And otherwise, that largely takes us to what is the action phase in the corporation's turn. So there's a paid ability window before and after every single one of the runner's clicks. I'd argue that the paid ability windows here are used a bit less often. I think often more you're responding to the corporation. The runner uses their paid ability windows better during runs normally, at least most decks. I guess shapers are a bit different, but exactly the same as a corporation, that there's a paid ability window before and after every click. The only difference here is because the runner is the active player, they will have priority at every single click. So you can always go first. The runner always has to say, paid ability window opens, I'll pass priority. The corporation does nothing. And then the paid ability window closes, and then you can do your next click. Again, 90% of the games, this doesn't happen at every single click. It's not that tedious, just the times that it does matter. It should be obvious to both players there's something going on. After that, we enter the discard phase where the runner discards cards down. Identically to the corporation, that means the last paid ability window before you discard cards is actually the last paid ability window after you take your last click. Again, there's always a paid ability window after every single action. So if you want to crack a Stone Chip chart room to charge your Hippocampic to give you an additional hand size, you have to do it during your action phase and not during your discard phase. Equally, this is a really nice window as a corporation. If they have Advantage in Keeling, they can res it after the runner has taken their final click. They can res this during the paid ability window, and now the runner is going to enter the discard phase with one hand size less than they want. That actually is a pretty common way to use Keeling. It's good fun. Then finally, there's another paid ability window here. This one again is a bit strange. Not a lot of people make use of this paid ability window. This is technically the last paid ability window before turn ends and discard phase ends. So if you're trying to match hand size with Lat, who's trying to tie the corporation's number of cards in hand, the corporation could draw 2 cards clicklessly by resing a Spin Doctor. And in response to that, the runner can draw 2 cards with a Stone Chip chart room. So it's a bit of a niche interaction here. Again, this is technically the last paid ability window in which you have priority going into the Corp's turn, but you still have that paid ability window at the beginning of the Corp's draw phase if there is something that you want to get on the table for some reason. You just won't have priority there. But again, very few people use this paid ability. It's a strange one. Finally, the runner's turn ends and then the runner's discard phase ends. Same sort of thing with conditional abilities. If you have multiple things that care about that point in time, you can order them in the way you want. Hoshiko says when your turn ends, if you access a card, gain 2 credits and flip this identity. So then if you have a Citadel Sanctuary that says when your turn ends, do a trace, go ahead and do Hoshiko first. So you have more money, let alone when you flip over, you have a link. Conditional ability thing, you choose your order. And that's the entire phase structure of turns. Corp's turn, runner's turn, largely the same. There's usually this sort of upkeep phase, it's called the draw phase. Then you have the action phase, then you have a discard phase. Importantly, there's always a paid ability window before your turn begins. It's really weird to think about that like that because you think the turn begins is when the turn begins, but it's slightly after that. So that's a very important window for both players. Recurring credits, turn begins, mandatory draw, then we have actions. Paid ability window between every single action and after your final action, and then one weird final paid ability window after you've discarded down. That is largely it. You can't score agendas on the runner's turn, and you can only score agendas during your action phase and your draw phase. Again, this one's really weird. Nobody cares about this one. All right, we have one more topic, which is about the paid ability windows during a run. And I'd argue this is the much more interesting time. This is where runners are constantly doing paid ability windows because inherently breaking ice, resing ice, all that stuff happens at paid ability speed. So last topic, let's get it. All right. So slightly further down that page, you get the timing structure of run. Mind you, again, these are recaps. If you hit the section number, it goes through everything at greater detail. The first part of a run is the initiation phase. This is where the runner announces the attacked server. Now, sometimes there can be additional costs for running different servers. Earth Station is a good example. Either running HQ or sometimes running a remote will cost you additional credits. It's worth knowing that you pay this cost before you make the run. So if you're playing a run event that gives you additional credits to make the run itself, if you think you have bad publicity to pay for that, you can't. You have to pay all this upfront before the run even begins. So just watch out for that. Next thing up is the runner gains bad publicity credits. So if you know, bad publicity is a thing that the corporation will have, and every run the runner makes, they gain these extra credits to use during this run for each bad publicity the corporation has. Bad publicity credits are lost at the end of the run, whether it's successful or unsuccessful, so you might as well use them during a run. The only important thing to understand here is that this happens only now. So say you're midway through a run and the corporation reses an illicit piece of ice and gains an additional bad publicity, that does not become a credit for you. If there are any cards that care about how many bad publicity the corporation has, it will count this additional bad publicity, but you only get bad publicity converted into credits right there at the start of your turn. So you'll have it waiting for you for your next run. But now technically the run begins, following that same idea that the begin step is almost never the first thing in the step. But this is important for very few cards that care when run begins, they get to do something. Shout out to the As gang, understanding that when the run begins, you've already have your bad publicity. That's awesome for cards like Masterwork and Prognostic Q-Loop. As is good fun. Next up, you'll check if there's ice protecting that server. If there is, you'll enter the approach into the encounter step potentially. Otherwise, you just jump way down on this timing chart. Let's imagine there's some ice and we hit the approach ice phase. Now, the runner is approaching ice. If you have any cards that say when the runner approaches ice, they trigger this, they will trigger now. There's very few of these in the format. I think there's actually none in startup if I'm not mistaken, so don't worry about that too much. But now we have our first paid ability window during a run. That's actually really important to know. The first paid ability during a run is on approach. And this paid ability window allows you to do basic paid abilities and allows you to res non-ice cards. And very specifically, this is the only paid ability where the corporation can res ice, and only the ice that is being approached. So here, the corporation, you're resing into a Karuna, they can res the Karuna. Again, they can res non-ice cards at so many other paid ability windows across both players' turns. This is the only time you can res ice on approach. Now, firstly, this is actually really interesting. This is a paid ability window, and currently the active player, assuming we're making a run on the runner's turn, is the runner. So you actually enter this paid ability window with priority. 90% of the time, though, the runner will just implicitly say, okay, go ahead, and the corporation will res their ice. But in theory, they have priority here, and that's actually very important to understand. Now, that means you have the ability as a runner to act first at this paid ability window. You won't know what the ice is because you're going before you're allowing the corporation to res the piece of ice, but that can be important. This is a really niche card. It's called signal jamming. I don't know if I've ever seen a C play, but technically this paid ability window here, once the runner says, I got nothing, I'll pass priority to you, and they're expecting the corporation here to res ice, the corporation can also do normal paid abilities and res non-ice cards, which means they can res a signal jamming and they can trash a signal jamming. Again, all without handing priority back because the runner has already handed priority to the corporation. So the corporation can do as many paid abilities as they want in a row without interruption until they return priority. So signal jamming says that cards just can't be installed during this run. That can be a problem because now the corporation can, while holding priority, res an Anansi. And now if the runner is expecting to install something like an MK Ultra when they encounter the piece of ice, or use a self-modifying code during that same paid ability window to install a killer, they just can't. And so that Anansi is going to hit you. So that's kind of interesting that you actually have priority during this encounter. And if you're expecting a signal jamming, you could call it and say, hold on, before I allow you to res, I will pop my self-modifying code preemptively. Now, you don't see this often, but it's important to understand. You do have priority first, and once you give it to the corporation, they can do whatever they want before giving it back. Equally, the corporation here, if you give them priority, they can res a ping. When the ping is res during a run on the server, you get a tag. The corporation can continue to res a Keegan lane, and then use the paid ability on Keegan lane to remove that tag to trash one of your programs. That's going to be a problem. Now, even if the runner hasn't installed no free lunch, they're just not going to be able to fire that to interrupt this Keegan lane because, of course, the corporation currently has priority, and you just have to let them do all the paid ability windows they want uninterrupted in a row until they hand priority back to you. So yeah, that one could be pretty rough if you're playing criminal with no recursion. So yeah, Keegan lane is sometimes waiting for you. Now, as we said, we do have priority going into this, and that helps as a runner. If you're running with one, maybe no cards in hand, and you're pretty sure that the ice is an anemone, you will have priority there on the approach. So you can always crack that stone ship chart room first before giving the corporation the ability or the priority to res their anemone and do true net damage to you. Nice. Now, equally, resing ice is a paid ability, so after the corporation goes and res something like a Jua, which says when you encounter this, you are no longer allowed to install cards, priority is passed back to you because the corporation has done something with that paid ability window. It goes back to you, and then you can say, okay, well now when I encounter this, it'll be a problem, so I'll use my self-modifying code now. So as a runner, if you do pass priority into the corporation and they do something in the paid ability window, like res ice, they always have to pass it back to you and you can respond. Similarly, if they res an Anansi, which says when you encounter this, if you don't break all the subroutines, you can flip switch during the approach, which means you didn't do it during the encounter and you're not going to take that 3 net damage. Awesome. That's a really important paid ability window. And I'd argue the fact that the runner goes first there is usually not important, but just understanding that you have the opportunity to, if you want to, could be the difference between program destruction or something really ugly in some situations. Now, if the ice was resed, you are going to go ahead and encounter that ice. Otherwise, we jump to the movement phase. But just watch out here. We're about to enter the encounter phase. And the runner encounters ice is the next step up, which means that this paid ability window is the last paid ability window before you encounter the ice itself. So if you have a card like Ngolo that says whenever you encounter the piece of ice, you may pay 2 credits to paint it as a code gate, that means that this card has to be installed before you encounter the ice. This is kind of like that checkpoint thing we talked about earlier. You can't install this ice during the encounter because it hasn't saw the checkpoint of you encountering that ice, which means that technically the last window for you to self-modify encode or simul-chip the Ngolo will be during this paid ability window on approach if you are relying on that 2 credit paint ability. Awesome. Let's move on to the encounter. That's where the ice actually hits. So here, the runner encounters ice. This here can be a huge conditional ability thing, and we've talked about this at length already, so understanding that there's 2 conditional abilities that fire on when the runner encounters something. So one of them could be the Zato City Grid, fire a subroutine. Another one could be Inside Job. Which one fires first? They both have the same conditional trigger. The active player has to do their thing first. So Inside Job lets you sneak around a single ice before the corporation can do a Zato City Grid. Sick. This is also kind of nuanced too. The runner encounters ice. There are certain cards that say when you encounter host ice, do something. And then there's certain other cards that say when you are encountering paid ability, you are able to do something. So Chisel is a card that cares about inherently the strength of the ice you're encountering, while Leech is a card that allows you to decrease the strength of the ice you're encountering. But because inherently this is something you can only do while you're encountering, and specifically it's a paid ability window, these actually don't interact at all. That's for 2 reasons. Firstly, you first encounter the ice, and then you are considered to be encountering the ice. That one's a bit like subtle. I don't like that one so much. But more importantly, Leech requires a paid ability, and there is no paid ability when you encounter the ice. The paid ability is right after it. So those don't work together. Watch out. That's a very subtle thing, but the next paid ability window is after you do the encounter. And next up, this is a huge paid ability window. This is the paid ability window in which you can do basic paid abilities and you can break subroutines. Now, we talked about this before. Technically, you can always boost the strength of Cleaver whenever you want, money into the trash. Sometimes that is a nice thing to do. But this is the one paid ability window where you can boost the strength and it will retain the strength. You can match the strength of the ice or exceed it. And then you can specifically use interface abilities that care that you're encountering a piece of ice and you have exceeded or matched the strength. So now you can use the paid ability to break the barrier subroutines. But very importantly, these 2 things are paid abilities, which means when you encounter the piece of ice, a paid ability opens, and that is one that you have priority with. So you can go ahead and start doing your stuff first. So you boost the strength, and while holding priority, you break the subroutines. And that means you can do all this sort of stuff while holding priority before passing it back to the corporation. That also means because you have priority during this paid ability window, you can continue to do multiple stuff before you have to break the subroutines. So say that we are now hitting the paid ability on encounter, we can crack our self-modifying code, pay 2 credits, install a K2CP turbine, and then now with increased strength, we can start breaking with the cleaver. So understanding that this is just a normal paid ability window is super valuable because you actually can do a lot of different things during this paid ability window. Now, this paid ability window is actually one of those strange exceptions. During this paid ability window, you can no longer res non-ice cards. Every other paid ability window in the game allows the corporation to res non-ice cards, and this one you can't. So if there was something like an upgrade that cared about the runner interacting with the ice, encountering the ice, you have to res that during the approach. This is a really old card, but just remember, you need to res this during the approach. So you res the ice, you res this, and then they encounter it, and then it'll be doing its thing. Now, importantly too, after the runner is done boosting and breaking any subroutines they choose to, this is still a paid ability window. So they have to say, I pass priority over to the corporation, which means the corporation can do basic paid abilities. So say you have a weird card like Project Kusanagi, imagine it has advancement counters on it. You can use these to give the ice that the runner is encountering additional subroutines. Now that doesn't mean that the subroutines are going to fire because again, you took a paid ability. So you still, once you're done doing your paid abilities, you have to pass priority back to the runner and they can just break those additional subroutines. So it is just like any other paid ability. However, we can only do basic paid abilities and we can only break ice subroutines. Finally, during the step, any unbroken subroutines resolve, and important to understand, subroutines resolve from the top to the bottom. So Little Engine is always a really good example. If this ends the run, the runner is not gaining 5 credits. The way to get 5 credits is to break the first 2 subroutines and let the bottom one fire. Also, once the first end the run subroutine fires, the second one doesn't fire because the run is just suddenly over. So everything just kind of closes right then and right there. All right, so now we've encountered the ice, our paid ability window is closed, all the unbroken subroutines have fired, and we move on to the movement phase. This is actually a really important phase. It's kind of easy to forget it's there, but it has some of the most important paid ability windows during a run. So firstly here, the runner passes ice. There are some conditional abilities that fire when the runner passes ice. And then we move on to this one other paid ability window here. This is a really sneaky one. And in fact, it's actually, the second paid ability that doesn't allow you to res non-ice stuff. Yeah, often I call this the House of Knives paidability window because I think this is how most runners unfortunately figure out that this paidability window is here, because this is the last paidability window that both players have access to before the runner is allowed to jack out. So if you rip your way through some disgusting net damage subroutine dice and you end up with no cards in hand, there's a paidability window here. And if the corporation has a House of Knives token and you have no cards in hand, they actually can hit you with this before you're even able to jack out. I have died to things like this before in the past, and that's what you have to remember as a corporation. There is a paidability window here. Now, of course, this is during a run, so the runner should have priority considering they're running during their turn. So they do have a card like Stone Ship Chart Room. Just remember, you enter that paidability window with priority, fire the Stone Ship before you allow them the opportunity to kill you with the House of Knives. All right, once we pass that one, the runner may jack out here, and this is actually really important. The runner makes maybe their final big decision on the turn. Now, if there is an additional ice here, this is where we begin to loop backwards and you go to the approach step and then counter step. There's technically one more paidability window before that. This is a really important paidability window, but less so if you're looping back, more so if this is the last ice on the server. And we're going to imagine that we've only gone through one ice. If there is more ice, you just kind of go back up to the top of the chart and you just do everything again in order. We've seen how that works. But here, if there's no more ice on the server and the runner doesn't jack out, they're locked in. This is the last time for them to run away. So if they are, say, I'm in, I'm not jacking out here, they can no longer jack out, which means we have one more paidability window here to make things as miserable as we can as the corporation because they have committed to access. This is also the last paidability window before the runner breaches the server, has a successful run, starts accessing our cards, which means if you have any paidability that allows you to just end the run, things like a Nisei Mark II in startup or standard, or like a border control, this is the last time you can fire it. That's really important because there are other steps after this, but this is the last paidability window that both players have access to. That equally means if the runner wants to install a card before they access with a self-modifying code or simulchip, this is the last time they can do that. Of course, the runner will have priority here, so if they produce some sort of program that you're unexpected, you can react to that by popping the border control. Now also, after this, the runner is going to approach the server, so this is the final paidability window. This is often referred to as the defensive upgrade paidability window. This is the last time the corporation can go and res their Managarm Skunkworks or their Anoetic Void and have these defensive upgrades online so that the run is going to be a bit more difficult to be considered successful. That is the last time you can do it. You don't have to res these when the runner approaches, or technically you can't do it when they encounter, but when they approach the last piece of ice on the server, you can do this right now after they've committed to the non-jack out. Finally, too, as the last paidability window, say the runner is running archives, you have agendas in here, this is your last possible time to crack a spin doctor to save those agendas, or even if the runner's running the spin doctor, you can crack the spin doctor to draw 2 and then use it immediately. So this is the last time, again, you can do any of these paidability things. We also talked about how the runner's committed to access too, so have fun making some nice traps. If you have an Urtica cipher on the table and it has some advancements on it, and at paidability window speed, you have the option to add more advancements to it, you can do it. And even if the runner sees what you're doing, if they don't have any specific card that allows them to jack out, they've already passed the window where they can jack out. So you can also use this paidability window to great extent to make some devious traps that the runner's already committed to finding out what they are. And this is the last paidability window during a run, and it is incredibly important. You'll see this paidability window get a lot of use, and you'll see a lot of corporations or runners ask when they're playing action before access, and they're generally referring to this paidability window here because there's a lot of use you can get out of this one. Finally, after this part, once both players have finished that final paidability window, the runner approaches the server. This is when these sort of abilities like Managarm Skunkworks that say when the runner approaches the server do something, that's when they will fire. And if you additionally have a Managarm and say like an Anoetic in the same server, understanding that these are conditional abilities like we've talked about at length in this video, because they're your conditional abilities, you can decide in which order they trigger. So again, order your triggers in the way that makes the most sense. Also understanding that there's no more paidability windows here means that you cannot force the runner to pay 2 clicks or 5 credits and then end the run with Nisei Mark II. Our last paidability window has just passed, so we're done. Finally, if the runner gets to the approach, they break through our defensive upgrades, we're on to the success phase. The run is declared successful, another classic conditional ability thing. So if the runner has multiple when successful triggers, say like a Zenith chip and a World Tree, they choose the order, and they have to do this stuff before our successful triggers fire because they're the active player, they're running. All right, so the run is a success. We're just about to breach the server. In fact, that is the next step. The run is declared successful. The runner breaches the attacked server. We jump down to the timing structure of breaching a server. Now, there seems like there's a lot of minutia here, and arguably there is, but most of these individual steps, you don't have to call them out during the turn. It's more so understanding when the conditional abilities fire. So firstly, the runner approaches the server, then the run is declared successful, and then we breach. So most players will have cards that care about some of these steps, and just understanding the order that they happen, that's the important thing. So again, you approach, then you make a success, and then you breach. Breach is the step of you actually touching their cards. And now the breach begins. If you have any cards that say when there's a successful breach, do something, those will trigger now. Conditional abilities, priority to the active player. And then if breaching archives, you flip face down cards face up. And then if you're breaching HQ R&D, you determine how many cards you are accessing from those zones. There are certain cards that will say when you breach, decide how many power counters to use to see that many cards. That's when this happens. You decide pretty late on into the run. Next, we check if there are candidates. This is a relatively new term that was added to the game, and a candidate is basically a card that you're allowed to access. So you're required to access every single candidate that you're allowed to access. If you're running HQ and there's an upgrade and you're allowed to access one card from HQ, you can choose the order in which you access those cards. You might not know what they are, but you have to access both the upgrade and a single card from HQ off of a single access. Say you're running a remote server and you know one of the cards is an agenda that you want to steal, but the other card is an upgrade that you don't want to access. You are still required to access every single card that you can during the run. You have to access every candidate. So just keep that in mind. You can't say, I'm done running, I'm going to go home. You have to touch everything. Now, this rule does get pretty wild when there's cards that potentially can introduce more candidates to the server. Any card that's introduced mid the access step, you have to access that one. And there's actually ways to make near infinite loops. Big ganked fans, huh? Awesome. So now we're accessing cards and we enter the timing structure of accessing a card. This is very formally laid out because of course it has to. This is a card game, but it's quite simple. The card is accessed. So if you have any ability to say when you access, do something that happens here. And now the runner may trash the card or use another mid-access ability. The term mid-access ability is something that we didn't bring up. There's actually a subsection of different kinds of paid abilities that have these sort of flags. We've seen the ones that say interface that you can only use when you're interfacing with a piece of ice, and another one is access. These are technically paid abilities. They have cost, effect, but anything that has the specific access flag, you are only allowed to fire while accessing cards. Now, if you look at this chart here, there's no paid ability window during access step. So it is this line itself that allows you to use the mid-access paid abilities on cards like Imp. There's not that many of these in the game, but just understanding this is where they work. They technically are a paid ability, but you can't fire them at any other point in the game besides exactly right now. Imp just says you can trash a card you're accessing, even if it doesn't have a printed trash cost. And that's actually important to understand that there is no more paid ability windows during any part of this breach or access step. So say that you access a card that has a trash cost and you don't have enough money to trash it, there is no point in time where you can crack the no free lunch to gain 3 credits so you can afford to trash the card. The last possible paid ability window, generic paid ability window you have access to is all the way up here at 4E during the movement phase. So if you think you're going to need some more credits to access your cards, to trash cards, you have to do it way longer ago. Not while you're holding the card and realize, oh, I'm kind of short here. But otherwise, Imp is a paid ability window you can use here, so you can trash a card. And very interestingly enough, as it's spelled out here, the runner may trash the card. That technically is a mid-access ability. So as you know, a lot of cards have trash can costs in the bottom right corner, and technically the way that that works is that the runner always has this one paid ability, access, so you can only use it during an access, pay the trash cost of the access card, paid ability, trash it. It's kind of goofy, but technically the runner always has access to this access paid ability, so they can use it whenever they're accessing cards. Now, having this access ability here is actually relatively new to Netrunner. It's always worked functionally like this, but to have it spelled out and formalized is pretty cool. Finally, once you pass that step, you've decided to not trash or not use any mid-access abilities. If the card is an agenda, the runner steals it. That's actually really important to keep in mind, is that you have to steal agendas. If you run into an agenda like a send a message, if the agenda does not have an additional cost, you are required to steal it. Now that's a big difference to other agendas. Cards like SDS drone deployment say as an additional cost for you to steal this, you must trash an installed program. You are never forced to do that. It's always a decision. So you can refuse to pay the additional cost, and if you do not steal the agenda. But any other time, even if you find an agenda that you wish not to steal, you have to steal it because it does not have an additional cost. Very importantly, the way that this is structured, the runner may trash the card or use another mid-access ability. That happens before you are required to steal the agenda, which means if you have something installed like an Imp, you actually have the opportunity to trash an agenda before you're forced to steal it. So say you run into that send a message, you can decide to imp it it gets trashed and you're no longer accessing it. You're no longer forced to steal the agenda. So there are some ways to get around that. It's very niche, but just keep that in mind, that you're allowed to trash the thing before you have to steal the thing if you have an IP. Otherwise, you're stealing it, unless it has additional cost. And that's finally it. The access is complete. This loops around back to here. Breaching the server is complete. Once we've gone through all the candidates, we loop through that. And now we go back here. The run is complete. Finally here, if there's any, after the run is successful or unsuccessful triggers, they will fire. Things like dirty laundry will wait till the run is over. You get this money after all that stuff is done. And that is the entirety of the timing structure of a run. As a basic recap, initiation phase begins, the run begins, bad publicity comes in, all that sort of good stuff. The first paid ability both players have access to is during the approach. The runner has priority here, but this is when the Corp reses ice, and often they're allowed to go first because the runner doesn't do often that much here. But remember, after they res the ice, you still have a paid ability window, and that will be your first paid ability window before the encounter. Then you encounter the ice, and then you have the paid ability window in which you can break the ice, let alone do any other paid ability stuff. The corporation can always respond to that, but they can't res stuff. And then again, it goes back to you because they did a thing if they did a thing. Finally, unbroken subroutines resolve from top down. If one of them ends the run is just over. And then we continue on to movement. There's that House of Knives ability. There is always one more paid ability where someone can get hurt or do something cool before you're allowed to jack out. If you jack out, the run is suddenly over. Otherwise, you will continue and you'll loop back to an approach and encounter if there's more ice. Otherwise, if there's not more ice, we get to that beautiful 4E, the last possible paid ability window before we hit that breach step. This is where you can res defensive upgrades. This is where you can end the run. This is where you want to install your programs that you want to have on the table before you access, before you make a successful run, trash your no free lunch to gain 3 credits. Then we approach. So all your defensive upgrades, they will fire here if you have them. And finally, the run is declared successful. Usually there's good run triggers for the runner for that. Now we breach, decide how many cards we access, and then we access the candidates one at a time. And every single card we access, we're allowed to trash it if we can. We're allowed to use mid-access abilities if we can. Otherwise, if it's an agenda, we have to steal it. Loop till completion, access all candidates. The run is over. You did it, gain your 5 credits from your dirty laundry. And that is the basis of a run. And that's a lot of ground to cover. But I think we've got through basically all you need to understand when it comes to timing in Netrunner. We understand run structure, we understand turn structure and all the phases and paid abilities. As a reminder, priority is super important in the game, but very easy to determine. The active player has priority. So for conditional abilities, you have to do all your stuff first, pass priority, inactive does all their stuff first. That's it. Otherwise though, if it's a paid ability window, the first player has priority and they get to do all the stuff they want in a row without interruption, and they pass to the inactive. Inactive player then gets their chance to do all the stuff they want in a row, and it passes back and forth until the player who receives priority passes. So technically 2 players have consecutively passed. Then that window closes and there's no more paid abilities until the next paid ability window opens. And that's it. I think that's it. Understanding where the paid ability windows are. There's one at the beginning of the turn. There's a bunch through the actions, and there's one after the discard phase for both players. That should cover most of the ground that you have. One last thing I want to just put in here. It's kind of a timing thing. Any card that says first time each turn, that's both players. So if you can fire this on your turn, that's one turn. You fire it on your opponent's turn, that's another turn. That's always good to know. And the last fun thing to shout out is if you want all this information summarized, this exists. This was made by some of the nice folks on the Green Level Clearance Discord channel. Shout out to Pre-Nick, who said they worked with a lot of other people. So I got to shout out more names. Let me know if you worked on this. I'll put you in the comments. But this is a sheet you can get access to in the Green Level Clearance Discord channel by simply writing !timing. This chart goes through all the phases. It has some nice symbols to tell you what kind of paid ability windows are at each point in time. And also these cards exist on little playing cards. I got these for free from Worlds as of last year. I'm not sure who has these, who exactly has made them and how to get them. But as soon as I find out, I'll let you know, because these are the sort of things I always keep on hand when I go to any event, not only for my own reference, but also to show my opponents so we can, walk through any sort of issues. Also call a judge. Judges are there to help you as well. And that is a full rundown of the timing structure. Thanks so much for watching this. I hope this was useful for you. I know when I was a new player, being confused when you can pull Clot, how can they do all those things in a row? Wait, I want to interact. Getting all that lined up is very important. So I'm hoping there's something you learned here. If there's something I missed out, if there's a timing interaction you think is really important for other players to know, hit me up in the comments. Well, I'm excited to read them, and I have no doubt other people are excited to see what other stuff exists within the timings of Netrunner. Otherwise, if you appreciated this, if you want to leave a comment, like the video, share it with a friend, subscribe to the channel, all that sort of stuff really helps us grow. And we'll see you in a bit. Take care. Thanks for watching. Ciao. All right, we got through that. Real talk, that is my second recording of this video. The first time I did it, the video was 2 hours and 45 minutes. And I'll admit, this was already probably a bit too long, so hopefully the timestamps, you can break this down into like a multi-part series. There's a lot to talk about. Brevity is the soul of wit or something. Huge shout out again to all these names here. These are just some of the folks that help support the Métropole Grid on Patreon. I am absolutely incredibly appreciative. These are the folks that allow me to put the sort of time and effort into these kinds of videos, into live streams and all the other stuff that happens on the channel. So thank you to these folks. If you want to find out more, support the channel on Patreon. The link is in the description. And otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this was useful for you. You learned a bit more about the timing, and now you're even more afraid of that Keegan lane that is always there whenever you play a criminal deck. Ha! Wanted to get this out sooner than later, especially now that the competitive season is really kicking in with Continentals, and we have a Nationals coming up just later this summer, as there are across the planet. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.